They said my heart was a dried-up prune, good only for the compost heap of memory. My own daughter, Clara, said it, with a pitying smile that felt more like a slap, her words softer than butter, but just as likely to clog the arteries of hope. "Mother," she'd cooed, head tilted just so, like a robin inspecting a worm it had no intention of eating. "At your age, isn't peace enough? This searching, it's a bit unbecoming, don't you think? Unbecoming. As if my desire for companionship, for a hand to hold while the twilight deepened, was a gaudy dress I insisted on wearing to a funeral. The funeral of my own aliveness, perhaps. Even the neighbors. Mrs. Henderson with her curtains twitching like a nervous eyelid. And Mr. Gable, whose dog seemed to judge my unmown lawn as a sign of encroaching senility. They had their whispers. Their sideways glances over shared fences were louder than any shout. "Eleanor's getting a bit lonely," they'd murmur. The word lonely, laced with a morbid curiosity, as if I were a fascinating specimen of decay. They saw the empty chair on my porch, the one beside mine on the swing, and filled it with their assumptions, assumed it was a monument to what was lost, rather than an invitation to what could still be. And for a while, a long while, I let their words seep in, like damp into old stone. I looked in the mirror and saw the lines etched by years, by laughter long faded, and tears too often shed. Were they right? Was I a house with its windows boarded up, a garden gone to seed, its season over? The thought settled heavy, like undigested grief. My late husband, Thomas, he'd been a good man, a steady man, but our life had been a quiet river, not a rushing torrent. And when he was gone, the quiet became a silence, so profound it had its own sound, a humming emptiness. Clara, bless her pragmatic heart, thought I should sell the house. "Move into one of those lovely communities, Mom. Activities! People your own age." She meant well, I know she did, but the thought of organized bingo and beige corridors made my spirit shrink. This house, with its creaking floors and temperamental plumbing, this was my soil. These were my roots. And wasn't it true that even old trees could sometimes put forth a new, unexpected bloom? I wondered about that a lot, especially in the evenings, when the sun bled across the sky and the porch swing creaked under my solitary weight. Was there a quiet rebellion left in me, or had I truly become what they saw? A relic, a memory, a woman, too old for love. The phrase echoed, a bitter refrain, too old. As if love had an expiration date, stamped on your soul the day you turned 65 or 70, or perhaps the day your first grandchild called you Grandma, with that innocent, defining finality. It was the roses, I think, that started to shift something. Thomas had planted them, a deep crimson variety called Mr. Lincoln. After he passed, they'd become straggly, neglected. One spring, I saw a single defiant bud unfurling amidst the aphids and black spot. It was small, imperfect, but undeniably alive. And I thought, well, if this rose can try, perhaps I can too. So, I bought gloves and shears and a book on rose care. I learned to prune away the dead wood, to feed the roots, to gently coax life back into those thorny stems. It was a slow process. My back ached. My hands got scratched. Clara, on her weekly duty call, clucked her tongue. "Mother, you'll exhaust yourself. Why don't you hire a gardener?" But it wasn't just about the roses, was it? It was about reclaiming something. About tending to my own patch of ground. And then Arthur moved in next door. The house had been empty for a year. A silent, watching presence. Arthur was quiet too, at first. A widower, I learned later, like me. He had a gentle way about him, a sadness in his eyes that I recognized because it mirrored my own. He didn't offer pity, or advice, or judgment. He just offered a nod when he collected his mail, a small smile if we were both out with the bins. He had a little vegetable patch he started in his backyard. And sometimes I'd see him out there, coaxing tomatoes and beans from the earth, much like I was coaxing my roses. We didn't speak much in those early days. It was more a shared silence, a comfortable awareness of another soul nearby, also tending a garden, also navigating the quiet waters of a life changed by loss. My family, particularly Clara, barely registered his existence beyond a cursory. "Oh, the new neighbor seems quiet. Good. Less likely to disturb you." Disturb me? The irony was rich. It was their well-meaning pronouncements that disturbed me, their assumptions that boxed me in. Arthur, with his quiet industry and his respectful distance, was a balm. He never once made me feel old. He just made me feel seen, like a person, not an age category. There was a different kind of life stirring, not a raging fire, but the gentle warmth of embers, still capable of glowing, still capable of offering comfort. And I started to wonder, as I watched him carefully staking his tomato plants, if maybe, just maybe, peace didn't have to mean solitude. Maybe peace could have company. Maybe it could even have a shared cup of tea on a porch swing. The thought was tentative, fragile as a new shoot, but it was there. The first real conversation we had was about a stray cat, a scrawny tabby that had taken to sunning itself on my porch railing, much to Mrs. Henderson's visible disapproval. "Belongs to no one. That one," Arthur said one morning, pausing by my fence. He had a way of speaking that was unhurried, thoughtful, a bit of a wanderer, like some thoughts, I suppose. I found myself smiling, a genuine smile, not the polite, strained one I usually reserved for Clara's visits. "I've been leaving out a little milk," I confessed, almost shyly. "She looks like she needs it." He nodded, his eyes kind. "Kindness is never wasted, Eleanor, even on a stray." He knew my name. I knew his, of course, from the sold sign. Arthur Finch. It suited him. It had a sturdy, unassuming sound. That day, he brought over a small bowl of fish he'd cooked. "Too much for one," he said, a faint blush on his weathered cheeks. "Thought perhaps the cat, or you." It was a simple gesture, but it felt enormous. It felt like a bridge being built, plank by quiet plank, across the divide of our separate yards, our separate griefs. We sat on my porch, me on the swing, him on the wicker chair that Thomas had always favored. And we ate the fish, and talked. Not about deep, sorrowful things. We talked about the weather, about the stubbornness of weeds, about the way the light changed in the late afternoon. Small talk, some would call it, but it wasn't small to me. It was the sound of connection, tentative but real, Clara called that evening. "How are you, Mother? Not overdoing it with those roses, I hope?" I told her I'd had a pleasant afternoon. "Oh, did one of your old friends visit?" she asked, her tone implying that my social circle was limited to ghosts of the past. "No," I said, a small spark of defiance kindling. "I had tea with Mr. Finch, the new neighbor." There was a pause. A long, significant pause. Then, "Mr. Finch? Mother, really? Is that wise? You barely know him." Wise! There was that word again, as if every action taken after 70 needed a committee approval for wisdom. "He's a kind man, Clara. And a good neighbor." "Well," she said, her voice tight with something I couldn't quite name. Concern? Or was it annoyance? Just Be careful. Men his age. Sometimes they're looking for a caregiver. The implication stung, sharp and sudden. A caregiver. Not a companion, not a friend, not someone to share a laugh with, but a nurse, a cook, a convenience. Was that how she saw me? As someone so desperate, so devoid of value, that I'd settle for being used? The old anger, the righteous anger, flared. I didn't say much more to Clara that night. What was the point? Her mind was made up, her image of me fixed. A fragile old woman, teetering on the brink of foolishness. But her words, meant to caution, instead firmed my resolve. I was not a victim in waiting. I was not desperate. I was simply open. Open to the possibility of connection, in whatever form it might take. My interactions with Arthur continued. Gentle as a summer breeze. He'd leave a few ripe tomatoes on my porch steps. I'd share a slice of the apple pie I'd baked, something I hadn't done in years. We discovered a shared love for old movies, the black and white ones, with dialogue that crackled. Sometimes, on warm evenings, he'd bring a portable radio out, and we'd listen to classical music, the notes drifting into the twilight, mingling with the scent of my roses and his night-scented stock. The porch swing, no longer a symbol of my solitude, began to feel different. It was still my swing, but the emptiness beside me felt less like a void and more like an invitation. An unspoken one, of course. We were, after all, of a generation that understood the language of restraint, of things left unsaid. But the silences between us were comfortable, filled not with awkwardness, but with a shared understanding. One afternoon, he found me struggling with a particularly stubborn root in the rose garden. "Here, Eleanor," he said, taking the spade from my hands. "Let me." There was no condescension, no implication that I was too weak or too old, just a simple offer of help. He worked with a quiet efficiency, his movements strong and sure. And as I watched him, a thought, bold and unexpected, bloomed in my mind. I like this man. I like his kindness, his quiet strength, his gentle humor that occasionally peeked through. It wasn't the dizzying, heart-pounding infatuation of youth. It was something deeper, calmer, a recognition, a feeling of rightness. Of course, the neighborhood watch, led by Mrs. Henderson's ever-vigilant gaze, noticed. The whispers intensified. "Eleanor and that Mr. Finch," I imagined them saying, "spending an awful lot of time together. At their age, always their age. As if life packed up its bags and left the building on your 70th birthday. As if companionship was a privilege reserved only for the young and nimble. It was tiresome, but also, in a strange way, liberating. Their judgment, Clara's anxieties, they began to feel like distant noise, the buzzing of an irrelevant fly. What mattered was the quiet peace I felt in Arthur's company, the way my garden seemed brighter, the way my own heart felt lighter. The turning point, the moment I knew things had truly shifted, came during a visit from Clara and her husband, David. They'd brought the grandchildren, little Lily and Tom, who were, as always, a whirlwind of joyous energy. Arthur was in his garden, and Lily, bold as brass, scampered over to the fence. "What you doin'?" she asked, peering through the slats. Arthur, who I knew adored children, though he had none of his own, straightened up and smiled. "Just seeing if these carrots are ready to meet the world, sweetheart." He showed her a newly pulled carrot, bright orange and earthy. Lily was enchanted. Clara, however, looked on with a tight, strained expression. Later, as we sat on the porch, Clara cornered me. "Mother," she began, her voice low and urgent. "David and I are a bit concerned. Mr. Finch seems overly friendly with the children." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Overly friendly? Arthur? The kindest, gentlest soul I'd met in years? "Clara," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Arthur is a good man. He was being kind to your daughter. There is nothing overly friendly about him. But you don't really know him, do you?" David chimed in, ever Clara's echo. "These days you can't be too careful. Can't be too careful." Another one of those phrases designed to shrink your world, to build walls around your heart. "I know him better than you think," I said, looking them both in the eye. "And I know kindness when I see it. Something perhaps you could learn to recognize." The barb hit its mark. Clara flushed. David looked uncomfortable. The rest of the visit was strained. As they were leaving, Clara paused at the door. "We just worry, Mom. We don't want you to get hurt. Or taken advantage of." Taken advantage of. There it was again. The assumption of my vulnerability, my foolishness. That night, after they'd gone, the silence in the house felt different. It wasn't the humming emptiness of before. It was a charged silence, filled with my own unspoken indignation. I walked out onto the porch. Arthur was there, sitting on his own steps, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance. He looked over, a question in his eyes. I simply walked over to my swing and sat down. He watched me for a moment, then slowly, he rose, crossed the small patch of lawn between our houses, and sat down beside me on the swing. We didn't speak for a long time. The swing moved gently, a quiet rhythm in the deepening dusk. Then he said softly, "They mean well, Eleanor. Families often do. Even when they're clumsy about it." "They think I'm a fool, Arthur," I said, the words finally escaping. "They think I'm too old to know my own mind, too old for anything but waiting to die." He reached over and very gently took my hand. His was warm, calloused from his garden work, strong. "You're the wisest woman I know, Eleanor," he said, his gaze steady on mine. "And you're more alive than most people half your age." His words, simple and direct, were like balm to a raw wound. They didn't erase the sting of my family's assumptions, but they offered a different perspective, a truer one. And in that moment, holding his hand, the porch swing creaking its familiar song, I knew. The decision wasn't a lightning bolt. It was more like the slow, certain dawn after a long night. It grew out of shared cups of tea, laughter over silly old films, the comfort of his presence beside me as we weeded our respective gardens, sometimes chatting over the fence, sometimes in companionable silence. It grew out of the way he looked at my roses, not just as flowers, but as a reflection of the care I'd put into them. And it grew out of the way he looked at me, not as Eleanor, the elderly widow, but just as Eleanor. One evening, we were sitting on the porch swing, as had become our custom. The air was soft, filled with the scent of honeysuckle from the vine climbing my trellis. Arthur had been quiet for a while, watching the bats flit against the bruised purple sky. Then he turned to me, his expression serious, but gentle. "Eleanor," he began, his voice a little rough. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." I waited, my heart giving a little flutter that surprised me. "This house," he gestured to his own, then to mine. "They're good houses, sturdy, but a house isn't truly a home without the right company." He paused, took a breath. "I'm not a young man, Eleanor. I don't have flowery speeches in me. But my days are brighter since I've known you. My garden seems to grow better. Even my cooking tastes better when I know I might share some of it with you." He smiled then, a shy, lovely smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. What I'm trying to say, in my own clumsy way, is that I'm very fond of you, Eleanor. More than fond. I felt a warmth spread through me, chasing away the last lingering chill of doubt. I'm fond of you too, Arthur, I said softly. Very fond. He took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Then, perhaps we could consider making this fondness a more permanent arrangement. My breath caught. I knew what he was asking. It wasn't a proposal born of youthful passion, but of something quieter, deeper, and perhaps more enduring. A desire for companionship, for shared days, for a hand to hold through whatever time we had left. "Are you asking me to marry you, Arthur Finch?" I asked, a smile playing on my lips. He met my gaze, his own eyes shining. "I believe I am, Eleanor Vance. If you'll have an old gardener, with calloused hands, and a quiet disposition." Old. He used the word. But from him, it wasn't a dismissal. It was a statement of fact, of shared reality. And it didn't diminish the proposal one bit. It made it more real. "I think," I said, my voice clear and strong, "that an old gardener with calloused hands is exactly what this old rose grower needs. We didn't seal it with a passionate kiss. We sealed it with a shared smile, a squeeze of hands, and a deep, contented sigh that seemed to come from the very marrow of our bones." The porch swing creaked. The fireflies danced. And for the first time in a very, very long time, my heart felt not just alive, but full, utterly and completely full. Telling Clara was an exercise in quiet fortitude. I invited her for lunch, just her. I made her favorite chicken salad, the way she liked it, with extra tarragon. She arrived, armed with her usual blend of maternal concern and subtle disapproval. "You're looking well, Mother," she said, her eyes scanning me, as if for signs of impending collapse or, worse, inappropriate youthful exuberance. We ate. We talked about the weather, about her children's latest school achievements. Then, as I poured the coffee, I said, "Clara, Arthur and I have decided to get married." The silence that followed was so absolute. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound I usually never noticed. Clara's cup clattered against its saucer. Her face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, then a flicker of something that looked like fear, and finally, settling into a familiar exasperation. "Married?" she finally choked out. "Mother, are you serious? At your age?" There it was. That infernal refrain. Yes, Clara. At my age. At his age. We are both, as you so helpfully keep pointing out, old. And we have decided to spend what time we have left together, making each other happy. Her face softened, but not in a good way. It was that pitying look, again. "But, marriage? Isn't that a bit drastic? Couldn't you just be companions? Why complicate things with legalities, with all of that? All of that. Meaning commitment, meaning a public declaration, meaning, perhaps, a challenge to her carefully constructed image of me." "Because we want to, Clara," I said simply. "Because we love each other, and because it's no one's decision but our own. Love." I'd said it, and it felt true. It wasn't the fireworks of youth, but a deep, steady, warming flame. "But what will people say?" she whispered, as if that were the ultimate arbiter of truth and happiness. Ah, yes. Mrs. Henderson's twitching curtains, Mr. Gable's judgmental silences, the hushed gossip at the grocery store. "Frankly, my dear," I said, channeling a bit of old Hollywood defiance, "I don't give a damn." She stared at me, genuinely shocked. I had never spoken to her like that. Perhaps it was the old Eleanor finally shedding her skin. Or perhaps it was the new Eleanor, emboldened by Arthur's quiet love, finally finding her voice. "We're not asking for your permission, Clara," I continued, my tone firm but not unkind. "We are informing you of our joy. We would like you to share in it. But if you can't, then we will proceed with our joy nonetheless." She was silent for a long moment, twisting her napkin in her lap. Then, to my surprise, tears welled in her eyes. I don't want you to be unhappy again, Mom. After Dad," her voice trailed off. And in that moment, I saw past her exasperation, past her judgment. I saw her fear. Fear for me. Fear of change. Fear, perhaps, of her own aging, her own future. My heart softened. "Oh, Clara," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Your father was a good man, and I loved him. But that was a different chapter. This is a new one. Arthur makes me happy. Truly happy. He makes me feel seen and cherished. Isn't that what you want for me?" She looked at me. Really looked at me. Perhaps for the first time in years, without the filter of her assumptions. She saw the lines on my face. Yes. But maybe she also saw the light in my eyes. The calm strength that Arthur's love had kindled. He does seem like a kind man," she conceded, her voice small. "He is," I said. "And he loves your grandchildren's visits. He's already planning what to plant in the vegetable garden next year, so Tom can help him pick beans." A small smile touched her lips. Tom would like that. The wall between us hadn't crumbled entirely, but a few bricks had definitely loosened. She didn't offer congratulations. Not exactly, but she didn't argue anymore. And when she left, her hug was a little tighter, a little less perfunctory. The wedding itself was a simple affair. We held it in my rose garden, under the big oak tree. Just a handful of people. Arthur's nephew and his wife, my granddaughter Lily, who insisted on being flower girl, scattering rose petals with solemn joy, and, to my quiet satisfaction, Clara and David. Clara even wore a pretty dress and managed a genuine smile when Arthur slipped the simple gold band onto my finger. Mrs. Henderson watched from her window, of course. I imagined her commentary, but for once I truly didn't care. The sun shone, the roses bloomed. Arthur's hand was warm and steady in mine. He hadn't written vows, nor had I. But as the justice of the peace pronounced us husband and wife, Arthur turned to me, his eyes full of a quiet, profound love. "My Eleanor," he whispered, loud enough only for me to hear. "My beautiful rose." And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had made the right choice. Not just in marrying Arthur, but in choosing myself, my own happiness, over the chorus of doubts and dismissals. They said I was too old for love. They were wrong. Love, I realized, isn't about age. It's about connection. It's about courage. It's about tending to the garden of your own heart, even when the world tells you its season is over. Life with Arthur settled into a comfortable rhythm, like the gentle creak of our shared porch swing. We didn't try to merge our houses, not immediately. We kept both, like two old friends standing side by side, each with its own character, but now connected by a well-worn path between our back doors. He'd often have breakfast with me in my sunny kitchen nook, and I'd join him for supper in his cozy dining room. We gardened together, my roses and his vegetables flourishing under our combined care. He taught me the secrets of his prize-winning tomatoes, and I showed him how to properly deadhead the peace roses to encourage more blooms. The neighbors, after the initial flurry of gossip died down, mostly accepted us. Mrs. Henderson even offered a stiff nod one morning, which Arthur declared a major diplomatic victory. Mr. Gable's dog still eyed us suspiciously, but even he seemed less inclined to bark as we passed. Perhaps they saw something in our quiet contentment that disarmed their judgment. Or perhaps they simply found new subjects for their scrutiny. It didn't matter. What mattered was the peace we found. Not a solitary peace this time, but a shared one. The evenings were my favorite. We'd sit on the porch swing, sometimes talking, sometimes reading our respective books in companionable silence, sometimes just watching the world go by. The swing, once a symbol of my loneliness, was now a vessel of our shared journey. It held our quiet conversations, our comfortable silences, the gentle weight of two lives intertwined. Clara visited more often, and she started to see Arthur not as a threat or a potential problem, but as the man who made her mother smile again, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. She saw the way he'd bring me a shawl if the evening turned cool, or the way his hand would instinctively find mine. She saw the small, everyday kindnesses that are the true bedrock of love. One day, Lily, now a bit older, asked, "Grandma, why did you marry Mr. Arthur when you were already old?" Children, with their innocent directness, often cut straight to the heart of things. I smiled, pulling her onto my lap there on the swing. Arthur, who was pruning a nearby rosebush, paused and listened, a gentle smile on his own face. "Because, my sweet girl," I said, "love doesn't have a bedtime. It doesn't care if you have wrinkles, or if your hair is grey. It just cares if your heart is open." And my heart was open, and so was Mr. Arthur's. And we found each other. Lily pondered this. "So, you can fall in love even if you're a grandma? Especially if you're a grandma?" Arthur interjected, winking at her. "Grandmas have very wise hearts." Lily giggled, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For this man, for this second chance, for the courage to defy expectations and choose my own path. There were still moments of melancholy, of course. Life is never without its shadows. Sometimes, looking at an old photograph of Thomas, a pang of bittersweet memory would surface. Or a careless word from someone, a reminder of societal expectations, would briefly sting. But these moments were fleeting, softened by the steady warmth of Arthur's presence. He understood. He had his own memories, his own quiet griefs from his past life. We didn't try to erase those parts of each other. We simply made space for them, alongside the new joy we were building together. We were two trees, planted late in life, side by side. Our roots didn't tangle in a youthful, all-consuming way. Instead, they ran parallel, supporting each other, drawing strength from the same soil, reaching for the same sun. And in our shared shade, new life blossomed. Not just in the garden, but in our hearts. People still talked, I'm sure. But now, when I imagined their whispers, they sounded different. Less like judgment, more like, well, perhaps a grudging admiration. Or maybe just plain surprise. "Eleanor Finch," they might say. "She certainly surprised us all." And I would smile, because I had surprised myself too. I had found that even an old door, one that seemed closed and locked for good, could open again onto a new and unexpected vista. One filled with sunshine and roses and the quiet, steady love of a good man. A man who didn't see me as too old, but as just right. And what do you think? Isn't that what we all hope for in the end? To be seen, to be cherished, to find someone to share the porch swing with, no matter how many seasons have passed us by? I think it is. And I am grateful, every single day, that I was brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to believe it was still possible for me. The porch swing creaks. Arthur takes my hand. The sun sets, painting the sky in glorious hues, and all is well. All is truly, wonderfully well.